Okay, fantastic. Welcome, everyone. We are very excited to welcome all of you to our webinar today. We are going to be talking about the science of naps with Dr. Lisa Meltzer. We are just going to let everyone join, so we'll give everyone a minute or so to join, and then we will do a formal introduction of Dr. Meltzer, who we're very excited to have here today. We can see a lot of people joining. There we go. Wow, fantastic. And so while everyone's joining, you're welcome to pop into the chat and tell us where you're joining from, which would be great. Um, I am based in New York City and Dr. Meltzer is based in Denver, Colorado. So we'd love to hear where you're all joining from as well. We see a lot of people joining, which is fantastic. And I think we will go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Natalie Barnett. I am the VP of Clinical Research at Nanit, and I am joined today by Dr. Lisa Meltzer for our webinar today entitled "The Nap Struggle is Real, but You're Not Alone, the Science of Naps." And so Dr. Meltzer is the owner of Nexios Consulting in Denver, Colorado, and she provides sleep solutions for researchers and as well as clinical providers. She's also a professor of pediatrics at National Jewish Health and a professor of family medicine at the University of Colorado School of Medicine. She's a licensed clinical psychologist who's certified in behavioral sleep medicine by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and is a diplomat of the Board of Behavioral Sleep Medicine. So we're very, very lucky to have Dr. Meltzer joining us today. I wanted to just start out by saying, we know as sleep researchers that naps are really one of the most stressful parts of sleep for new parents, and we want to sort of talk a little bit about that struggle and help you understand a little bit about the science of naps today. We really want you to understand that it's very normal to struggle with naps, and we hope that over the course of the webinar we will hopefully build up your confidence and give you a couple of tools and tips and tricks to take away with you. So I'm going to start, Dr. Meltzer, by wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the biology around naps and why do babies nap?
Yeah, well, first, I'm just so delighted to be here today, and I can see folks from all over with toddlers and infants, and I know that naps, as you said, are definitely something people struggle with. Naps are a biological feature. It's a need, especially in young children. And the reason why is we have this process that helps us sleep called process S, sleep homeostasis, which is a big fancy science word for balance. And we all want to be balanced in life. Nobody wants to be too hot or too cold. Nobody wants to be too hungry or too full. And it's the same thing with sleep. We need to maintain a balance between wakefulness and sleepiness. And with this process, every hour that we are awake, we will be sleepier than we were the hour before. So all of you, regardless of how much you slept last night, will be sleepier than you were when we started at the end of our webinar. It's nothing to do with Natalie and I, it's just natural biology. But as adults, we can make it about 16 hours of wakefulness before we have so much sleep pressure or so much sleep need that then we need to sleep at night. But young children don't have that luxury. So infants can make it 2, 3 hours before they need to sleep. Toddlers can make it maybe 4 or 5 hours, but their sleep pressure builds up so much faster that they need to nap to relieve that sleep pressure. And you can see what happens often if you skip a nap is that your child's emotions and behavior, they change very quickly when tell they're at that edge of needing a nap. Or you see that you'll just be out and about and out to sleep they'll go. I have a nephew who's now in medical school, but when he was a preschooler, we took him ice skating right at around nap time, and he just laid down on the ice and was like, he was done. It was his nap time, and you don't mess with it when kids physiologically need to sleep. It's, humans are the only animals that tend to push through when we want to stay awake longer, but kids don't have necessarily that ability quite yet.
Amazing. That's a really great answer. And can you tell us a little bit about how naps support sort of growth and development and, and even, mood regulation?
Yeah, naps are part of sleep, and sleep is essential for every part of development. One of the things that happen when young children go to sleep, when they go into their very deepest sleep, is growth hormone is released. So
Mhm,
literally, our children are growing in their sleep. That teething is, there's now some science suggesting perhaps not always, but we know that teeth grow in sleep as well. And so
mhm,
sometimes teething pain can definitely interfere with sleep. But we also know that naps and sleep in general help with brain development and cognitive development. So when you start talking toddlers and preschoolers, the science show that naps help to consolidate any learning that has gone on. And so then when they wake up, they're able to reproduce a task, or they're able to their language development. So that's really important. And then again, emotion regulation is the thing that parents notice first,
yeah.
right? So whether it's your child gets cranky or your toddler or preschooler gets hyper. Again, Natalie and I were talking about our children. My son is now 15, but when he was young, he'd start running laps, manic laps around the house, and he'd run into a wall and he'd fall down with this hysterical laughter. And I kind of knew he was a little sleepy, even though he looked really hyper, right? And so we see that sort of that behavior control and emotion regulation is the first thing to go when children are sleepy. And that's true with nap time as well.
Lisa, how would you characterize that for, for much smaller infants rather than toddlers able to, who are running around and it's much more obvious
You
for
should
them?
hear the cry difference, right? That's their language. That's infant cries from birth until they get that language development. Crying is really their only language. And so they have different cries. And every parent I know can tell that difference. You can cry of when they're hungry versus when they're uncomfortable, but there's sort of that tired, whiny cry. Or
Yeah.
you may start to see behaviors that children do as infants that they kind of they're kind of their tell or their cue, whether it's their eyes getting heavy or they start rubbing their ears, or something that's a tell that you can tell they're starting to get sleepy and it might be time for nap time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great comment. Um, Lisa, tell us, look, I know we're saying, recognize these signs and then just put your baby down or your toddler down for a nap. It sounds
Ideal.
easy, like it sounds very easy and utopian. What, but we know very often that doesn't necessarily always happen so easily. And a lot of people really, really struggle with naps. Do you have any, sort of general recommendations? And you can think about it by age, if you like, for for folks who are, struggling with naps, whether it be you know, trying to get their baby to sleep for the nap or perhaps even having, a short nap. I would love to hear your sort of general tips and recommendations and we can sort of take a deeper dive if you like as well.
Naps are fickle. They're really one of the hardest things that, as a sleep psychologist in our field of sleep, pediatric sleep, is something that's even hard for us to make recommendations about because they're different. Every child is different. And, we used to joke, although it's pretty true in every family, like you're going to get one good sleeper and one bad sleeper. And if you choose a third child, you're rolling the dice, right? And
Yeah.
so that's because when children are born, they're born good sleepers or bad sleepers. Like that first year and a half, it's a lot of it's genetic predisposition. So you can be the parent who creates the best bedtime routine in the world, who has a very set nap schedule, who does everything by the book, and your child does not cooperate because
Mhm.
that's their temperament and that's their natural innate biological functioning. And I often tell parents just wait till they're stubborn teenagers and then you're really in for it, right? You do see a lot of temperament related to naps. Really laid back, easygoing babies
Yep.
are the ones that they just nap wherever, whenever you put them down, they nap. That's the way their temperament is. It's the ones who have a little bit more difficult temperament, often we see are the ones who struggle more with naps, and those kids don't like to follow the schedules you set for them or take what cat naps or very short naps, those 15 or 30-minute naps. And I can't remember which one. There was a parenting book out there at one point that said a 30-minute nap doesn't count and it's not a real nap. And that's wrong. Sleep is sleep. And again, some kids, 30-minute naps is all they get.
Yeah.
And 4 30-minute naps is the same as 2 1-hour naps. The
Yeah.
sleep does add up.
Yep.
Daytime and nighttime sleep work together. And so it's just more frustrating when you're the parent of the kid who only sleeps 11 hours at night and not the parent of the kid who sleeps 17 hours. And when I see those parents in clinic, one is like, I'm doing everything right. And the other one's like, what did I do wrong? And really, you guys didn't do anything. Your babies were just born that way. So I think a lot of it is learning about your infant's temperament and it's sort of where they're at so that you can try and create nap routines, just like a bedtime routine. You can try and do it on a schedule or you can try and do it on demand. There's not one right way to do naps. The right way is the way that helps your baby sleep. And especially when they're young, if they only nap in the stroller and the weather's still nice, then walk them during nap time,
Correct.
right? If you have to, as long as they're in a safe situation where you're rocking them or something like that, and that's the only way you can get them to nap, that's what you do. All of these things you do to get by, and that's more important. Your baby needs to sleep, and you, as a parent, your mental health and well being is so critical, and you need them to sleep to maintain that. And as they get older and you're ready to start doing any type of sleep training, whatever that looks like, then you do it.
Yeah.
And sleep professionals, pediatricians are a little different because they have their one way of doing things, but sleep professionals like will work with you where you're at because we understand that those first 3 to 6 months are survival mode, right?
Mhm.
And you do what you have to do to get them to sleep, to get you to sleep, and that's okay.
Yeah.
At some point you do have to start to change it because the science shows that biology changed to environmental factors that influence naps, especially after about a year of age, especially for kids who are in daycare, where a lot of naps are forced because everyone naps at the same time. That same child at home may nap twice a day, even though they're napping once a day in daycare.
Yeah.
So there comes a point where the environment does influence, but those first 6 months, it's sort of do what you can do to get them to nap.
Yeah, and I really like that because I think it can be really hard for folks to, they think that a lot of people think that, their neighbor's baby is sleeping these two two beautiful 2-hour naps a day, and that's exactly what everyone else has to sleep, and it's just really not true. It's so particularly for the as you said, for those first couple of months, we know that a lot of babies just physically can't self-soothe, and so you need to be the one soothing them. So if that means that you need to rock them, you need to hold them, you need to pat them, you need to do all the things, to help support their sleep and help get them to sleep, then that's okay. And it may be that your neighbor's baby goes down in the crib perfectly for that 2-hour nap and your baby does not, but that's fine. And to your point, as they start to get a little bit older, we know that those, environmental factors can really make a difference. So, thinking about setting up your baby's sleeping environment so that it's going to be conducive to sleep. We want to make sure that, that room is dark, that that crib is clear, they're on a nice firm mattress,
Mhm.
and then as they, move towards that sort of, 4 to 6 month mark, we want to make sure that they're in their full size crib so that they can really start to move around that crib space. And we want to think about that crib space as being kind of like a gym for your babies, right? They're practicing for naps and at night, all of the things that they're learning during the day. And we want those movements to be as unrestricted as possible. So it's, can be really helpful for them as they get a little bit older to have that crib space to be able to move around. But it can be really hard for parents in those first couple of months just to not have that, that structure throughout the day, particularly when, as new parents, very often we have come from jobs that are, very, predictable. Our days are very predictable, and going into new parenthood can be completely unpredictable and really, really difficult to get that predictability. Know that that predictability will come, but in those first few months, it really can be a struggle. So,
Yeah.
I really like that that you said that.
Well, and the other process I just want to go back to, I
Yeah.
talked about our homeostatic sleep pressure that builds up and requires us to nap. But the other thing to understand about those first 3 months is that internal rhythm that we have, we call it our circadian rhythm, it's not developed. That doesn't develop until infants are between about 12 and 16 weeks, which is 3 to 4 months of age. So, whereas you're expecting them to have this nice chunk of sleep at night and their perfect little naps during the day, they have no difference between night and day. So, they sleep, wake consistently around the clock. It's a biphasic pattern, and there's no rhyme or reason to the timing of it. You still want to start introducing darkness at night and light during the day to help the rhythm develop. But that's just what it is. And that's why we've both mentioned it's just sort of that survival mode in those first few months, is because, again, we're working with their biology, and their biology doesn't know the difference between night and day yet. So I think that's really important too.
Yeah. And so what I wanted to, and I know that we're sounding, I don't want to sound too wishy-washy. I want to sort of I do want to think about how we can sort of, you know, talk a little more concretely about what naps can look like as they get a little bit older. But what we do know is that, around 6 months, most babies are generally taking, somewhere between 2 and 4 naps a day. It might be 4, it might even be 5, but it may be maybe as few as 2. So most babies are taking 2 to 3 naps a day at that point. And then they will typically transition from, 3 naps down to 2, somewhere around this sort of 6 to 9 months-ish sort of range, so that by around 9 months, most babies are taking around 2 naps a day pretty regularly. But some babies are still taking 3. Some babies might already be down to 1. There is so much variation in what is normal, and it can be really hard for parents to understand that, I think. Um, and then as they get a little bit older again, they will then transition from 2 naps down to 1. And all of these transitions can be really, can be tricky for parents to navigate. Do you want to talk a little bit about those transitions, Lisa?
Yeah, sure. So again, naps are fickle. I
Yeah.
just, I keep saying it. And as Natalie said, we talk about most babies, but even most babies, 2 to 4 naps is a pretty big
Big
range right
range,
there.
yeah.
And so it's hard to plan a day. That's one of the things that parents complain the most about, is I can't get these naps scheduled. You can try doing that. There's again the different approaches of you just nap on demand versus, we go so many hours and then we try for a nap. But the transitions are hard because they're not quick. It's not like one day we're taking 3 naps and the next day we're taking 2 naps and we're there from there on out. You see it sort of transition. Some days, we'll take 3 and this day take 2 longer naps, and then we're back to 3, and then we start to go to 2. And so that can be very frustrating at that point when we get down to those 2 naps, as Natalie was saying. And then between 12 and 18 months, which by the way is 6 months, that's a
Yeah.
long time, right? They will transition from 2 to 1. And anywhere within that window, they can do it. Again, babies who are in daycare who move from an infant room where they free nap to a
Mhm.
toddler room where they get 1 nap a day, they'll be on 1 nap a day if they're at daycare. But then on the weekends, as I said, they may go back to their natural 2 naps because it's not as forced. For parents who are at home, that's really frustrating to try and plan something. If you have some days 2 naps, some days 1 nap, especially if you're trying to work from home and you're planning that meeting for nap time, I will tell you naps are the worst babysitter out there,
Yeah.
because the one day you need your child to nap at a certain time is the one day I can guarantee you they won't.
Yeah.
Right. And so that unpredictability makes it very hard to try and balance all the things that parents and caregivers are balancing. So it's just being patient with it, knowing that this too shall pass, and before you know it, it's hard when you're sleep deprived and you want your baby to go down. But again, starting around 6 months, teaching your child self-soothing skills, teaching them that ability to fall asleep. We always start with bedtime because that's when they're the most sleepy. So even if that's the only time you focus on helping your child learn to fall asleep at bedtime, once they have this self-soothing ability to go to sleep at bedtime and then return to sleep during the night, they will be able to do that at nap time as well. You can start by trying to do some sleep interventions around nap time. For some children, it works just great, even if they're not able to do it at nighttime. But it is tied to self-soothing. Sleeping and naps are, you have to be calm and self-regulated. And again, if you have an irritable infant, that's going to be really hard. They may not have that innate ability and that innate skill, and you may have to start teaching them how to develop those self-soothing skills that allow them to fall asleep without you or without assistance from something else that they can't do for themselves.
Yeah.
So that's important
Can
to
you
keep
say a
in.
little more about that, Lisa? Can you explain why we think it's important for babies to be able to self-soothe?
Yeah, I think that so when you go to sleep at night, again, I know we're talking about naps, but it all ties to what happens at
Yep.
night. You go to sleep, right? Everybody falls asleep in a certain amount of time, typically 10 to 20 minutes, maybe up to 30 minutes. And then we go through different stages of sleep through the night. We have deep sleep and lighter sleep and dreaming sleep, and we cycle between these stages of sleep. And at the end of each cycle, we have a brief arousal. Our brains wake up. And sometimes we wake up, but usually we don't even realize it. You know, as adults, we wake up somewhere between 2 and 6 times a night. But a sleep cycle in an infant is 50 to 60 minutes, so an hour. So if you feel like your baby is waking up every hour on the hour during the night, congratulations, you have a healthy, typically developing baby in terms of sleep, right? Like that's normal. Waking up all night long is normal. The issue is whatever you have to help you fall asleep at bedtime, you will then need to help you return to sleep for each of these nighttime wakings. We call this a sleep onset association. So it's something we associate with going to sleep. So the simplest is I like pillows. I put my head on my two pillows. Life is grand. I go to sleep. And then I wake up in the middle of the night and my two pillows are on the floor. And I may think to myself, well, when the pillows fell off the bed, it woke me up. But really, what happened was the pillows had fallen off the bed like 30 minutes earlier. But I hit the end of my sleep cycle and I rolled over to go back to sleep, and my pillows weren't there. So if I scoop my pillows up, put my head back on them, I'm able to go back to sleep. That's what we would call a positive sleep onset association, something I can do for myself, right?
Hmm.
A teddy bear, a thumb sucking. We can talk about different types of pacifiers, things like that, that a child by the age of 7 months can reach for and do themselves is a positive association. The ones we call negative is because it involves something the child can't do for themselves. So if you are feeding your child to sleep, if you are rocking them to sleep, if you are nursing them to sleep, if you're putting them in the car and driving them until they go to sleep, nobody minds doing that at bedtime. And as I said, we want to do it for nap times until children get on a consistent schedule and nap habits. The problem is if you do that at bedtime, then when they have their normal nighttime arousals, they're going to need that to go back to sleep. So it's cute and wonderful and cuddly and you love it at bedtime. I get it. But then you're 9 p.m.'s okay, 11 p.m.'s okay. By 1 a.m., you're kind of like 3 a.m., 5 a.m., right? And it just gets harder and harder throughout the night. And so sometimes we bring babies into bed with us, and it may not be a safe sleeping environment. So we have to be very careful about that. I mean, again, I was a sleep professional 10 years before I had my son. And I remember waking up one morning with him on top of me going, they're going to kick me out of the field. Like, what are you doing here? But, I had nursed him and I had fallen back to sleep. And,
Yeah.
so it happens, life happens. Everybody's fallible, right? Like, and so if we teach our infants some self-soothing skills at bedtime and teach them how to fall asleep at bedtime, that skill will generalize. They will start to learn to put themselves back to sleep. They'll learn to be able to put themselves to sleep for nap time. And just in general in life, they'll learn to calm themselves when they become distressed. So I think that's sort of the science behind why we need to do it.
I really love that. And one of the analogies I like to use is when your baby is falling asleep at the breast or falling asleep, at the bottle or being rocked, and then you're transferring them to the crib, it's kind of like you falling asleep in your bed and then waking up in the middle of the road and not knowing how to get back to your bed. Like it would be incredibly frustrating to not know how to get back to your bed. And that is what is happening to your babies. They're becoming fully awake. They don't have what they had, to your point, at the beginning of the night or even the beginning of the nap to get them to sleep. And it's frustrating for them. And we don't want our babies to be frustrated. We want them to have all of the tools that they need to be able to get themselves to sleep, and that so that they can fairly easily get themselves back to sleep when they wake up. Um, But that said, we're really talking about babies as they get a little bit older. We're not talking about, a 4-week-old or an 8-week-old baby. It's completely developmentally appropriate for those babies to be falling asleep at the breast and the bottle. So we don't want you to be feeling guilty that your baby, fell asleep at the breast when they're very little. So we really,
6 months
we,
is,
yeah, so we really want to think about that differentiation, because I think it can be very difficult for a lot of parents to, you know, to understand that difference, and know that it really is developmentally appropriate when they're little for that to happen. But as they get a little bit older, we really want to think about those self-soothing skills that we can help develop,
Mhm.
for sure. Okay. Um, Lisa, tell me, um, thinking about sort of creating um, a good environment for naps. Is there anything else that I didn't mention, that, or that you would add about, thinking about how we would create that sort of a fairly optimal environment for, for naps and for nighttime?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you hit on some of the important ones. A dark room is always important. So getting room darkening shades so that it's the same room. I do want to say there's, some people have very different opinions about what dark means.
Yep.
There are some people who say it has to be pitch black.
Yep.
And then there's people like me who say, no, it doesn't have to be pitch black. Night lights are good, especially as you start to, that's a little bit of light that helps you navigate the room. It's okay for the child to have. That's not going to keep them awake at night. When you start getting into some preschool age and they have a little bit of fears or worries, if you have lava lamps or a small table lamp, or even we call them fairy lights, they're like the tiny Christmas lights, you
Yep.
put them
Yep.
around. I would rather have an infant and child sleep with some light on than not sleep at all.
Yep.
So no bright overhead lights, no, anything like that. But the other thing to know about light is whatever you have at bedtime has to be on all night. So some parents will leave a hall light on or a closet light on at bedtime and then turn it off when they go to bed. And then the child wakes up in a dark environment. So if you're choosing any sort of light, just make sure it's available all night. Same thing with sounds.
Mhm.
The question of should there be a sound machine? Should it be deathly quiet? Like, how should it be? If you live in a home where there's other noises, then a humidifier or a fan, something like that to cover the noises can be helpful.
Mhm.
For some children, some babies especially, that white noise can be very soothing. You don't want a real loud sound machine. We don't want to hurt babies' ears. But, I think that sometimes having that little bit of background noise can be helpful. And then you as a parent don't have to worry so much about it.
Mhm.
So dark, quiet, comfortable, so cool, whatever temperature you're sleeping in, you want the baby to be in. You don't want their room to be extra cold or extra hot. And in terms of clothing, I'm again thinking about what you're sleeping in. In the summer, when I'm sleeping in tank top and shorts, my baby should be in a onesie. In the winter, when I'm in full flannels, right, they should be in a warmer sleep sack or something, So think about that in terms of temperature. Natalie
Yep.
mentioned flat surface, nothing them, and all those types of things. That's very important. And of course, we recommend smoke-free homes, because we know that cigarette smoke is related to SIDS. And so that's just something for the home environment. But those are all sort of environment things that you want to have ready for sleep at
Yeah.
bedtime and for nap time.
Yep. And Lisa, I just wanted to jump in on the white noise there for a
Yeah.
minute. The other reason that I love to add a white noise machine to a sleeping environment is because it also makes it much easier to travel. Because if you're when your baby is used to a particular sound, like Denver sounds very different to New York City, sounds very different to Aspen to LA to wherever. And so when you're traveling with your baby, if you can fairly easily recreate your home environment, by having a white noise machine, it can just make it that much easier for your baby to be transitioning to be sleeping somewhere else. So I would just wanted to just add that plug for a white noise machine as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
I want to plug because somebody just recently joined as well about transitioning to bed. I wanted to mention this before when you were talking about moving from a bassinet into a crib and giving
yeah.
kids their moving spaces. It is really important to understand that children like their cribs. They like small spaces. If you ever watch them play, where are they going to crawl to? Where are they going to waddle off to? It's small spaces. They
Yeah.
like boxes, under desks, under tables, because that's their size. That's their
Yeah.
world. When children cry at bedtime, it's not because they hate their crib. Okay. They may look like they hate their crib because they know you putting them in their crib means it's sleeping
Yeah.
time and they're overtired. And again, for babies, their language is crying. And so
Yeah.
it's a tired cry. It's not a I hate my crib cry. Now, that said, transitioning from cribs to beds, because that's sort of the next step up, we recommend keeping, and I know it's really hard when you're expecting a second, but we recommend keeping infants, toddlers, and preschoolers in cribs until the age of 3, the development age of 3, because at 3 years, children understand stay in bed. If you transition them at 18 months or 21 months or 24 months because a second child is on the way or has arrived, they're more likely, as Emily's child does, to crawl out of their bed and wander because they have freedom and they can do that. And again, they don't have that cognitive understanding of stay in bed. So we really recommend keeping them in that safe environment, safe for them, safe for you. They're fine there. They'll learn to love it. Just until that age is, I think, something important that parents don't often hear. So get a second crib if you're having a second child.
Lisa, I will always say it will be the best $100 you ever spend to buy that second crib,
Yeah.
and you can get a good crib for $100. Like, you don't have to spend a lot of money. But the other thing, to your point, like, children and babies and children love their cribs, and there's so much change that happens when a new sibling arrives
Yes.
anyway. The last thing you want to be doing is ripping that child's bed away and giving that to the new sibling. So I would, for a variety of reasons, I would always recommend trying to get that second crib if you can.
Yeah.
So, but I do see some questions in the chat, which I think are great. And this is a really nice one from Emily. What are some self-soothing skills for younger babies, specifically for under 6 months? Lisa, do you want to tackle that one?
Yeah, I mean, soothing is because when they're distressed. And so sometimes they need to figure it out on their own. And this is again where trusting yourself and trusting what you know about your baby, because you know your baby better than
Yep.
anyone
Anyone.
else. And you can tell the difference of a frustrated cry, like I can't reach that toy on my playmat, frustrated cry. And if every single time you help them, they're not necessarily getting that skill. So
Yeah.
sometimes encouraging them, sometimes guiding them, sometimes giving them that skill to figure it out. Sometimes, though, you can tell the cries are like, I'm really distressed. You need to pick me up and hold me. Absolutely, right? I'm not saying ignore your child's crying. I'm saying just learn their language and give them a chance to soothe, to figure it out, and to sort of recognize what's a fake cry versus
Yeah.
I really need you cry, because they learn really easy, how to get your attention and how to get them to be picked up. And sometimes they need it and sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
But in those first 6 months, again, if you feel like they need to be fed or changed or attended to, absolutely. It's starting around 6 months that starts to be really obvious that they need to learn that skill of soothing, that they may need to cry for a few minutes until they figure it out.
Yeah.
Which can be hard and can be distressing. As a parent, it's not natural. And if you're a nursing mom, it makes your boobs hurt. I get it. But, sometimes if it's not a feeding time, if you know that they're, should be okay, see what happens and see what they can do and how they can learn to self-soothe. Other soothing things you can do are introducing, again, not in the sleep environment per se, but loveys or soothing objects. And you can do that very early. As soon as you start nursing or feeding your child, have them hold a lovey or a small blanket or something they begin to associate with comfort.
Hmm.
And that way, then when they become distressed, you can give it to them and they can feel it and they can rub it and they can give themselves that same level of comfort. And so I think that's something from very early on you can introduce. And then once it's safe, it goes in the car seat, it goes in the stroller, and when ready, it can go even into their crib. And that way they can self-soothe because they have that comfort object to help them as well.
Yeah, I love that. I really love that. Okay. Moving on to another question in the chat. Do you have any suggestions? This is really cute. On how to navigate nap time with toddler twins. They tend to start playing with each other at
Of
nap
course.
time, unless they're in different rooms. So, do you want to tackle
Yeah.
that one?
Well, and and toddler twins, again, depending on if they're identical or fraternal, may not have the same nap schedule, especially if they're
Yeah.
fraternal. That's just like having two kids at the same time, as you well know. And so in that case, which again just adds to the frustration and inconsistency, you may have to have them nap in separate rooms. If you're okay with them talking and playing for a half an hour before they conk out, great, more time to you, right? More power to you to give them that space. They're in a safe space. You get a little breathing time, and eventually they're going to knock out and go for their nap anyway. So that's fine. If you find they don't nap when they're together, you may have to separate them for naps, and they may
Yeah.
have separate spaces for naps. And this is true at bedtime as well. Like, I love keeping kids in the same room, and for generations, kids shared rooms, and I have no problem with that. But if they're keeping themselves from sleeping, and especially again, if they have different sleep needs or sleep schedules, like I know families who have one twin who's like 7:30 out cold and the other one never goes to sleep before 9. So putting them both in the bed at the same time may keep the early sleeper awake longer. And the late sleeper it just can become challenging. So I think that sometimes just weighing again what your kids are doing and is important as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that. And it's great that if you have the option to have them separated for naps and that works, it would be great if you could do that if
Yeah.
to Lisa's point. Okay, so we have another one. Um, Okay. Would love to hear your thoughts about the potential downsides of implementing an ideal environment for naps in terms of children not being able to nap in other environments, e.g., daycare or out and about.
Right. Okay, well, so daycare is where they tend to nap better than at home because I don't know what it is, everybody's napping, or again, if they're in an infant room, just whenever and those infant room workers, I mean, give them such bonuses. Like, they're
Yeah.
amazing, right? They handle all these
Yeah.
babies at the same time, and they're feeding this one and changing that one and putting the third one down for nap. I don't know. It's like they have extra arms.
Yeah.
But they know the signs and the cues, and they put the babies down. They nap fine there. And once they move to a toddler room, because everyone's napping, it's like this peer pressure you wouldn't believe. So
Yes.
daycare is where they tend to nap. At home tends to be a little bit harder. Um, but you're right, it can get a little bit harder if you're rigid and you have this very set environment and this very set schedule. Most kids, once you get them on a set schedule, again, that circadian rhythm is going to take over. And so if your child consistently naps every day from 1 to 3, chances are if you're out and about and they're in the stroller or in the car, wherever you're on the bus, they're going to knock out because their body's going to feel that pressure. And so they don't necessarily need that sleep environment.
Yeah.
Now, the irritable ones that we've talked about, the ones that have the more difficult temperament, they may not do that, but chances are they aren't the ones that are doing your nice long 2 hour consistent
No,
naps
exactly.
anyway. And so there can be a downside of it. But also keep in mind, this is a short period of time. I know it feels frustrating because you want to get to the library hour or you've got work to do or whatever your reason is that you're like, I need them to nap right now, but we're talking 6 month periods of time. By 18 months, most kids are down to one nap a day. It's usually a pretty consistent thing. And most kids can nap in different places. They learn to adapt. And for the ones that don't, at least you have a consistent nap time every day,
Yeah.
right? And so I think, it's sort of everything's kind of a pros and cons of what's going to work best for you and your family and your schedule. But children do really well with structure and consistency.
Yeah.
It may not be the way we as adults like to live, but in their world, that actually does help them quite a lot.
Yeah. And to your point, Lisa, I really think that that's kind of the key takeaway is the more consistent we can be with them, at home, the easier it's actually going to be for them to be, falling asleep when they're somewhere else. And particularly if we think about getting the timing right, right? Like if we're, they're very used to having a nap, from 12:30 till 2 every day at home. And then if you're traveling somewhere or you're going somewhere, you will try and give them the opportunity to nap at around that time. And typically most typically they will be able to fall asleep at around that time if they're given the opportunity, even if it's not their ideal sleeping environment. So, but that, consistency really is, key to so many things we do with babies. Okay, we've got another couple of questions. How late is too late for bedtime? 6 months old. Do you pick a consistent bedtime or do you follow, wake windows instead? I think that's a really great question.
It is a great question. I think wake windows are one way to follow it. I think you have to think about your schedule.
Yep.
So especially if you're a working parent and you get
Mhm.
home late and you want to spend time with your child and you put them to bed late, um, I don't care. But what I do care is if you have to then get up at 5:30 in the morning and you're waking them up at 5:30 in the morning and then they're tired and crabby, irritable when you drop them off at daycare, that could impact them because then they're not getting enough sleep. If you work a late shift or for whatever reasons you're out in the evenings because you have other kids and activities and you put your young baby to bed later, a 6-month-old to bed later, but then they can sleep in the morning, I don't care, right? And so again, it's all these rules you hear are not hard and fast. They're not suggestion, just guidelines. That's it. They're guidelines, right? That work for many children, but we have a lot of flexibility within it. So making sure your child's getting the best sleep opportunity is really important because, again, so much happens with sleep that having a bedtime best as possible is the best. If it's 6:30, if it's 8:30, if it's 10:30, it's when is your baby going to be ready? If your baby takes a nap on the way home from daycare from 5 to 5:30, they're not going to do a 7 o'clock bedtime. But hey, that gives you more time with them. And so again, sometimes judging those naps and having those wake windows, what those wake windows are, that's sleep pressure building up, right? Your wake window has to be long enough to have enough sleep pressure to go back to sleep.
Mm.
And so it's a
Yep.
biological need, and you can do that. For now, I'm a big data geek. My whole life is about data. And I think that, and I don't want you to become obsessive about data. People do that as well. But for a couple of weeks, keep track of it. Look at what time your baby's napping and what time they go to bed, what time you're waking them up. And then after a couple of weeks, like if you can do it on a graphical type thing, you can
You
see
can
a
do it in your
pattern.
Nat app, Lisa. It's all
Oh,
there
you
for
can do it
you.
in, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I forget.
Yeah.
Do it in the app and you can see a pattern. You'll see what time your kids are napping. You'll see that when they take an early nap, they nap longer, or when they take
Yeah.
a later nap, they nap longer. Or you can see if the nap ends at a certain time, bedtime was later. Use those data along with your cues from your child who you know best to make decisions because I mean it's information. Also keep in mind a week in the life of your child is like 3 years in your life, right?
Yeah.
They are growing and developing so fast that every month doesn't matter what you did the month before because they're completely different creatures now. And so, constant change is part of the struggle of, infancy.
Yep, yep. No, I think that's a great, very, very wise words. There's more questions in here, Lisa, that I would really love to get through.
Yeah.
Um, Kayla, this is kind of amazing. My 3-month-old sleeps through the night, yay, but
Yep.
barely sleeps during the day and will not fall asleep at all in the typical wake window time. What can I do to help with daytime nap sessions? I think it's a great question.
It is a great question. And so sleep is cumulative over a 24-hour day. And so children who sleep longer at night are likely to sleep a little bit less during the day. And
Yep.
since you got the lucky one who's sleeping through the night at 3 months, that's partly why they're not sleeping as much during the day. Again, you can try wake windows or, you can try some of these soothing methods at 3 months. We're still good with, if you notice they get sleepy during feeds or whatever, just keep feeding them till they're asleep or take them out on the walks while the weather is still good. You can't naps, again, they're fickle. You can't force them per se. You
Yeah.
can try and create the nap routine. You can try and create the nap environment. You can try and have a hard, fast wake window schedule, that may not work.
Yep.
And just be okay with that. And if they're functioning fine, then they're doing fine.
Yeah.
right? If they're irritable all day long because they're not napping, well, then yes, you really need to work on getting a nap schedule in place. But if they sleep all night and they're happy all day, more power to you. I mean, right? Like, and that could change, a month from
Yeah,
now, they could
and
be.
but I also just wanted to add the caveat, Lisa, that to your earlier point, it can be really hard to expect a really consistent schedule at daytime schedule at 3 months.
Yeah.
But for most babies, around 4 months is when you can start to think about a daytime schedule. It can be really hard before that. And a lot of babies at 4 months are not going to be following a consistent schedule. But that's about the time when you can start to expect and start to experiment with having a sort of a more consistent schedule during the day. Would you say something similar?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I know that it feels really hard right now to be having this baby who is, struggling with naps during the day, but know that over the next few weeks, you will likely start to see that probably that first nap of the day start to get a little more consistent. You probably notice that there might be easier to put down for that first nap of the day. And I would say take that as a win. Like take one nap as a win and then do the rest of the day out and about if you need to, or, in your arms or in the stroller or whatever, way you have been trying to get them to sleep. But know that then over time, their next nap will likely start to get a little more consistent and start to develop. But it really can be hard in these early months. And it can be particularly frustrating when you have a baby who sleeps so well at night. Why doesn't that automatically translate to, sleeping beautifully during the day? And it just very often doesn't. So, but those naps will come, but just be, consistent, and, you can try to implement somewhat of a sleep schedule over the next, month or so. Know that it may not be perfect though. It may be, take another few months before your baby has a fairly consistent schedule throughout the day. Um, and I know we're not super definitive about, the exact date and the exact time when your babies are going to be sleeping perfectly. But again, it just varies from baby to baby. There are going to be some 3-month-olds who, take 3 or 4 beautiful naps very consistently during the day. That is not the norm, though. That is less likely than having a very, very inconsistent day. But as they get a little bit older, as they start to approach that 6-month mark, that is about when you can start to expect some more consistency throughout the day and start to experiment with having a more consistent schedule throughout the day. So, um, Lisa, I think we have just about reached time, and this was just so incredibly helpful, and so it's so wonderful to chat to you. Is there anything that you wanted to, any sort of last takeaways you wanted to give to folks before we finish up?
No, I again trust yourself and your instincts as a parent. You do know your baby best. It's very hard because the first question everybody asks you is, how's your baby sleeping? And as I said, babies wake every hour on the hour. So if you have one of those babies, tell them they're sleeping like a baby and
Yeah.
just let it go. Don't engage. Everyone's got advice for you. Everyone's going to tell you you're doing something right or wrong. People have very strong opinions about sleep,
Yeah.
and it's hard. Don't get try not to get sucked into it. And you know that some of these skills that your child may need to learn or will eventually come. I know there were a couple questions in here. Becky had asked about rolling over. Like it's a great developmental skill when they can learn to roll over, but they haven't learned to roll back yet.
Yeah.
Same
Yeah.
like they can stand up in the crib, but they don't know how to sit back down. Those are milestones, which are great. They don't last very long, a few days, and then your baby will figure out the other part of it.
Yeah.
And so we don't do a whole lot to intervene there. But trust this and just know that, again, naps are fickle. I've said it now 10 times. So just keep telling yourself that every time you get frustrated by it, that, this is okay and that you're doing okay as a parent. And if
Yeah.
you're ever can't get them to nap and you're frustrated and you're tired and you're irritated, set them down in a safe space and walk away. And that's okay too. They are okay. And you need that break from them. And that's okay. Don't feel bad. You are being a good parent by doing that.
Yep. No, I really love that. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So one other thing that I just wanted to mention, we are giving away a Nanit sound and light machine, and the winner of our sound and light machine is Brittany Cardoza. So Brittany, our we if someone from Nanit will be in touch with you to get your information. And then we'll get that sent out to you ASAP. And then the other thing that I just wanted to mention is that we have 3 more Parenthood Unfiltered webinars and workshops coming up this week. So if you wanted to have a look on our website for the and in our the community section of our website, I think they are. That there's a lot of information there and a lot of other folks that we'll be talking to this week. So I hope you'll be able to join us for those. I wanted to thank Dr. Meltzer for her time today. It was just so lovely to see you and chat with you, and it was just such a pleasure. And thank you so much. And thanks everyone for the great questions and staying, staying so engaged throughout. So thanks so much, everyone. And everyone will get a recording of this so that you can revisit it if you like. So thanks everyone, and have a great day.